3, 2, 1.
It's been wonderful having an opportunity for the three of us to talk a little bit about our family, about the ancestors, and then things that God's been doing in our own generation. And I think it'd be wonderful if we could begin today speaking a little bit about the way God called you and Dad to come to Richmond and some of the early days here in the city.
Well, ever since I was a small child at 5 years old, I had a burden for missions, though I didn't know what missions really were. But people used to ask me when I was small, what do you hope to be when you grow up? And I'd always say, a missionary. And I'm so thankful that I was raised in a Christian home and a Pentecostal home, and that always before us was not only the thought of preaching in this country, but the thought of people across the water. And when I was in my teens, when it was summer vacation, I would read one whole book, a 300-page book in a day. And I would be so fascinated about missions in India and China and many places. And I believe that that's one reason why God has let me go to so many countries, because I used to cry and pray for the missionaries and pray for the bad situations like binding the feet of the ladies in China and throwing the good, healthy babies to the crocodiles in the rivers in India and many of the other countries. But then I not only wanted to go to the foreign field, but I wanted to go to preach in this country. And I'm so thankful that God gave me that privilege. It gave my husband the same privilege. He had a call, and I did too before we were married. And then after a few years in the ministry, God began to burden us for the city of Richmond. Our home originally had been Washington, D.C., but we felt a burden to come to Richmond. And when the burden began to come upon us, we did not know when we were coming, but we just knew that it was sometime in the future, though we knew that God was going to tell us when to come. And so it was about 3 years after we first felt the burden that God said to us one day, it is time now to plan to go to Richmond.
Now, where had you been ministering? I want you to tell that story about the year you had $109 that came in for the entire 9 or 10 months. Where were you ministering in those days?
I was in Quantico, Virginia, at the Marine base. God had called us to go there, and God blessed us greatly. But you see...
And that's all you had come in that entire, was it a year or 9 or 10 months?
It was about 9 or 10 months.
What did we have to eat?
Quite a variety, but not not all the pleasant things maybe that you would like to have had.
So what did you do? Fix beans one meal? Or?
I've done that many times.
But during that year, what did you have? You've told.
Well, I can't just remember. I know that after I was in Quantico, God sent us to a country place. This was way before we came to Richmond. And times were hard. That's what I want to get across. Because people today can't imagine that we will ever maybe go back to what the times were way back there. It wasn't that you were wasteful with money. The money just was not forthcoming.
And when you went to North Carolina, wasn't that the Dust Bowl? Wasn't that the dust problem?
No,
was that later?
Not the Dust Bowl. That was out west. But it was a drought that had been there for 2 years. That's when we first went preaching. And we went to Hosky, North Carolina, and several other places in North Carolina. And for 2 years, they had had a drought. And there were quite a large number of the people were tobacco farmers, and they had made good money and so forth. But even the tobacco, you see, had dried up with the drought. And there were farmers who had big cars, we'd say almost like Cadillacs today. Of course, some of those cars are not in existence anymore. I mean, they don't manufacture them, but they had big cars, but they couldn't buy tags for their cars, and they had them in their garages, and they brought out what was they called the dog carts, which was actually one mule pulling a small cart. And what they would do, they would start out from their home with their family, and they'd stop along the road to pick up many families and crowd them in, and they'd all have to stand up going to church because many of them would have had to walk 3 or 4 or 5 miles. And so everybody was helping everybody else. But it was because it was not only depression, because this was in 31, the depression was in 29, and then from 29 to 31, you see, there had been a drought there. And so times were very hard. I believe we're going to see much of that again in the future, and this present generation is not going to be able to take it.
Wasn't the pastor's rent, was it $5?
$8.
$8.
It was $8 a month for her rent, and the only way that the rent was collected, somebody got a burden for it, and they went to everybody and asked for 10 cents. 80 people in the congregation giving 10 cents each, and when I gave her 50 cents, I didn't have too much. She said, "Oh, no, this is too much. Just give me a dime." But I had offered the 50 cents, and I felt very small and very cheap to do that, because I was used to a church of 1,100 members that I belonged to in Washington, D.C., and many of them worked in the government, and those people had much more money than anyone else. And I thought, I am doing something terrible to just give 50 cents.
I like the story that happened in Quantico about the rat bed and the $12. You recall that?
Well, that's quite a long story. My husband had a call to go to Washington. We didn't have a car, but he got a ride either with the milkman or the bread man. We were 40 miles from Washington. And so he got a burden, had planned to go there. And so he says, "Well, I hate to leave you with no money." And I said, "Well, I have 5 cents. What could we buy for the children to eat for a nickel?" Well, you couldn't buy a thing today, not even a pack of chewing gum. But in those days, you see, food was much less expensive, and so I felt God put it in my heart that I could go to the A&P and get a half a pound of Fig Newtons, and that's what I did. So when he said, "I hate to leave you with no money," I said, "Don't worry." I said, "You know Nellie," which was one of our relatives and also a great friend, "she has been bringing us from her table bowls of vegetables and platters of meat and all, because they never ate for supper what they had for lunch, and they all had a dinner meal for lunch." And I said, "We'll be all right." Well, my husband was gone from Monday and Tuesday and half of Wednesday, a little over half, 2/3 of Wednesday. And Nellie came to see us Monday night and Tuesday night, and to talk and visit. She never mentioned anything about not having sent food for lunch or for supper either day. And it was a very tough time. And I had not even a crust of bread for the children. And God tests you many times to see whether you'll go all the way with him or not. So I would keep the children on the porch in the daytime, because I had one room rented. That was the way I got my rent paid. And I didn't want that lady to know we didn't have anything. So I would take them back to the kitchen for lunch and for supper and give them a glass of water. But your older sister, you were about 52.
That's probably why I don't drink water today.
Something like that. And she was about 4 or 4.5. And she would say, "But Mama, we haven't had breakfast yet." And when it was supper time, she'd say, "But Mama, we haven't had breakfast yet." She would never say we haven't had lunch, but it was always going back to breakfast, which was the thing that impressed her mind. And so I didn't quite understand why God didn't supply the food as he had been supplying. But I got one of the greatest experiences out of that. The main lesson that I believe he was trying to teach me in that was about the tribulation that is still to come. He showed me that there would be people in the tribulation that when they didn't have any food, they couldn't make it, and they wouldn't know what to do when their children didn't have food. And he taught me something that has stamped itself in me that I just can't forget. And it probably took that very crucial experience to do that for me. So when my husband came home, he said, I told him that we hadn't had anything to eat since he had left. And he had 40 cents in one cabbage. Well, we felt so rich to have 40 cents. Because in those days, you could buy a lot for 40 cents. But he said, "Now, isn't this something? When I go away, you can't seem to believe for the things that you need and for your food." And I knew that that was wrong because God was telling me he was testing me and trying my faith. And I said, "All right, now there is a lady that always sends us on Thursdays a pounding. And always before, she has sent us pork chops, hot dogs, sausage, or some kind of pork. Now, you know my favorite is lamb. And if I have not been the one that failed, but God was teaching me a lesson, which I still remember, and you see that's 50 years ago, or 52 years almost ago, it made such a deep impression that it's still there in my mind. I said, "Now, if I was not at fault and I prayed all that I knew to pray, and I believed all that I needed to believe, and somebody else was at fault, that lady tomorrow is going to bring lamb chops. Is that okay? You believe that I'm exonerated if lamb chops come?" He said, "Yes." Now I said, "If I am at fault, she's going to bring pork chops." He said, "Yes, that's fine." I knew we were going to get lamb chops the next day. And she brought 2 big bags of groceries, and it was lamb chops. Never after that did we have lamb chops. It always was pork chops or some kind of pork. Well, you see, God blessed me in letting that be, because there are times when you get in crucial tests and you wonder if you have believed sufficient. You wonder if you have trusted him all the way. And I think that God expects all Christians to go all the way with him and believe as much as we know how. So the next day, the very day that the lady brought that the lamb chops and such a nice 2 bags of groceries, I was sitting at the sewing machine sewing, making you some little suits because somebody had given me the material to do it. And my husband said to me, "I think I will go down to the church, and there is a board along the wall that I'd like to take up." Now, there was a Jewish lady in the city had given us permission for 9 months to have that building rent free. And it had been an A&P store many years before, but nobody had been there for 3 years. So when I still was sewing, he came back, and he had a newspaper all bunched up, and he spread it out on the wing of the sewing machine, And he said, something has happened that we've always wished would happen. He said, when I began to take that board up, I found a rat bed made of money. And so he said, I got a knife and I began to scrape it up. And he said, I can count about $7 here. Well, as I began to piece it together, there was about, I could see one was a $2 bill and the others were one. And I could figure something like maybe as much as $8 to $10. So the next day he got a ride with either the bread man or the milkman going to Washington. And we had heard that if a person threw money by mistake in a fire, if they could gather the ashes up, that our government at the Treasury Department could test that with certain chemicals and tell how much money that it was. So we had a need at that time for $12, which today would be like $100, or it would have been like $100 back there, because times were very hard. So he took it to the Treasury Department. They said, come back at 4 o'clock and we will give you good money for this. And so they gave us 12 crisp $1 bills.
Hallelujah.
And we felt so rich. And you know, God always blesses after a bad trial. You always get blessed. It seems
We
like.
must really be in store for a great blessing.
Well, I've always found that he just sort of pays you back for being willing to be tested by the Spirit of God.
It was after that you went up to San Flat. Let
And
me say,
sometime-
first of all, that
sometime,
the
yeah.
Assembly of God Church, you pioneered that work in Fredericksburg, in Quantico.
Yes.
That's an
yes,
outgrowth of your stay there.
Yes. There was no other Pentecostal church there. And God blessed us. But God gave us many experiences going many places. But that was so tremendous how that God performed that. So I always thought maybe some clerk in that store had slipped a little bit of money underneath this little low board that was there.
Probably not.
It might not have been.
Because the rats would take and drag it. They would get it from most any place, and they didn't have the cash registers then like we have today. They
No.
probably just had a little money box and would leave it in there at night. People were more honest probably in those days, and those rats
Because,
would take
you see,
and
that's
carry it.
been at least 53
Now you left there and went to Sand Flat, Maryland.
52 years ago.
You were there at Sand Flat, Maryland after that, and it's interesting, you went through the greatest trial of your life for 9 or 10 months, and the Lord sent you to be blessed, the most you'd ever been blessed.
That was before we came to Richmond. And we had the darlingest little house there. And we had a full basement under the house. And our well was in the basement. And people brought us 4 tons of coal, 2 big trucks full of wood. And they'd bring us carrots by the bushel, apples by the bushel. Everything was by the bushel. And I never spent more than $7 a month for groceries while I was there. They baked our bread. They made the butter. It was the most delicious butter because I never could eat country butter usually because it had a little sour taste. But this was so wonderful. And what I did every Monday morning, I fixed a box as much as I could, a big grocery box, and I sent it to a Bible school in Washington, D.C., my tithe of what he had given us that week. And then we had such a cute little cupboard, and I kept a pencil there, and I would mark on the wall every time I got a can. They would can a tenderloin pork. They would can the beef. And then they would give us all kinds of canned fruit and canned vegetables and things, canned sausage. And I got, in 1 year, 329 quarts of fruit and vegetables and meat. And so when I made a trip to Washington, then I would take the tithe of the jars there. And the Lord really blessed me in that. But sometimes I only paid about $3.50 for food a week. And it was, a month, I believe a month. And so God was very wonderful.
Glad you boys can count to 5.
3, 2, 1.
Mother, I'd like to continue talking about Sandflat, Maryland, because it was there that God blessed you so much. But we've seen the pictures of the snow that was right up to the top of the telephone poles. And if I recall, it was the worst winter that they had ever had.
In 80 years.
In 80 years. And yet, there were more church services in the 2 churches that you and Dad pastored than had been in any winter, or probably in all the winters since the churches had been founded.
We had Sunday services in both churches. We had, each one had a midweek service, and we had a prayer meeting in the homes for each church. And so we only missed one night and one Sunday morning. That is, I missed it, and you were small, several years old, and your sister was about 6 then. So how old would that have been? You would have been about
3.5.
something like that.
She was 2.5 years older.
Anyway, we had determined that we were not going to miss, and the telegraph poles were 16 feet high, and you only saw just about 2 or 3 inches at the top of that. And there was one-way passage, but they had dugout places every little way, and when you saw a car coming, you pulled into that dugout place, and there were hundreds of them on the road, and that was the way we got through. Then at night, the snow plows, you see, would come day and night, and we'd come home at night. It would be 35 below zero, and your daddy would carry you, and we lived about a block from the main road, and he'd leave the car there in a little dugout place, and then he would take you in his arms, and the older girl, who was 6, Betty, she would catch hold of my coat in the back with both hands. Here I'd come with a flashlight and the Bibles in my hand, and your daddy would sling his feet in the snow to make a path for us. And we had a little hill to climb, almost a block from the road, and then he'd get the fire stirred up, and we had a hot-belly stove in the living room and a cook stove in the kitchen. And then I would put a big heavy shawl over his head. He'd put his hat on top of that, and I would cross the shawl in the front and then across it also in the back and pin it. And he'd put his coat over top of it, and he would go back to the car, take the car a mile to a filling station where a lady had given us permission to park the car at night, because the snowplows would have pushed the snow up that we never would have got the car out, you see, the next day. And then he'd walk that mile home, and then that long block up to our house. And I actually have had water boiling on the cook stove when I went to bed, and the next morning there would be fire in the stove, but there'd be an inch or 2 of ice on the tea kettle.
That's
And
cold.
if I ever dropped 1 drop of water on the kitchen floor, it froze by the time it hit the floor in
Now,
the daytime.
It was there at Sandflat, Maryland. What was the other name of the other place? You pastored in one.
It was Painter.
Painter and Sandflat. And it was there that God gave you and Dad your first new automobile.
Yes, that was wonderful.
And
A 1936 Plymouth.
it's interesting, Ruth, that right in the midst of the blessings, the Lord spoke to him to come to Richmond.
And so we were there a whole year. And then God told us when it was toward the end of that year to get prepared to come to Richmond. And
You think you would have come if you'd realized all the hardships that lie ahead?
Well, I'd had nothing but hardships before I went to San Flat, but I had so many blessings up there, you see. You can't stop at the hardships, and you can't worry about the blessings, whether they're going to come or not. You just keep going on. But you see, all of that was in preparation for the future, and there were many hardships after we came to Richmond. But God told us that we were to come and that there would be a church, a vacant church in Richmond, and that he would bless us. And this was a 3-year vision that we had had, and now was the time for the fulfillment. So we left Washington, D.C., and came down to Richmond on the 19th of January, the day before your daddy's birthday, which was the 20th. And this was the year 1937. And we started over in East Richmond, and we went up one street and down the other, looking for this vacant church, because God had definitely told us. And after some time going up and down, we made 150 miles in those 2 days, just going up and down the streets hunting for this church. I kept telling my husband, I says, it's over this way, which was west. And we had started in the east of the city. And when we got over on the west end of Richmond, it wasn't too long the next day till we found it. But we found a church that was vacant, and the people in the neighborhood, the boys, had made it a playhouse because there was no playground around or anything that they could really enjoy after school. And so they had broken up the pulpit, broken up the altar rails. They broke 16 large places in the plaster of the church. It had a high ceiling, just like most churches. And they had broken 58 windows out. But we still knew that was our church. And God had spoken to a construction firm of people who came to our home church in Washington, and they gave us 15 gallons of paint for the church before we ever came and found the church. So then your daddy painted 2 coats on the outside and 2 coats on the roof. They had given us roofing paint as well as white paint for the building. See, it was a wooden structure, and we didn't know what we were going to find, but God had already prepared us and given us exactly what the need would be. But after 2 coats of paint had got on it, it still almost looked gray because it had been so many years since it had been painted, and the wood had soaked up a lot of the paint. But anyway, it was a wonderful time being there. And we've been now, that was in 1937. And while we were, making plans to buy the church, we already had done that. Then we had to wait a while for the completion of the sale. And so then we went, only $1,500 in those days. And I wouldn't know how much it would be today, but I'd say 50 or 60,000.
Or more than.
Maybe I would be very conservative.
But I can recall having to, you and Dad would get in bed to get warm so that he could go out and go paint some more.
In the month of February, because we really didn't have the money to buy the heat sufficient that we should have.
I remember that couch that you had. You used to open it up and make a bed out of it.
We had our credit transferred from Washington down here when we had first come, before we went away to hold a revival. My husband had gone to the, I don't know if it's Better Business Bureau or where, or the credit department, whatever, and had our credit transferred, and then we knew after several weeks of revival, when we came back, they would have already checked us out. So then we were able to go and buy furniture.
So we were living next door to the church in the Sunday school room.
Yes.
And
that was a wonderful time.
Yes, it was there on the 21st of January, 1940, that a new addition came into the family.
And that was Sister Ruth Heflin. And one of the ladies in the church says, "Oh my, you're going to have another mouth to feed." And you know, God really blessed Ruth, even though she was a tiny baby. All the clothes that she would have needed, all the blankets, all the nice pretty things, and the crocheted things that are so nice for a baby, God sent them all to her. And I think God did extra to prove to this lady that he could supply for one more, as well as the ones that were
That was
in our
Sister
family.
Blanche Carter, wasn't it?
Yes.
Now, wasn't she
And
the
she was
only?
a wonderful friend. She was the first one we met.
Well, the only person I guess you knew when you
We didn't know her.
hadn't met her at the camp before.
But
Had you met her once before at the camp?
we had not met her, but Dr. Schaefer, who was helping us, she had contacted him at the camp in West Virginia. And so he contacted her and told her there was going to be a church started. And so she was a very loyal friend all of her life to us. And so you see, that's way back in 1937. Now, this is the 28th of January, 1986. So it is almost 49 years that we have been in Richmond. And I hope that God will let me live long enough to be here for the 50th anniversary of coming to the city of
You
Richmond.
haven't been to Passamaquoddy yet, so I'm sure you'll be around for 50 and 51. And a few more years.
So we could tell thousands and thousands
Tell
of
some of
healings.
those hard luck stories. I can recall the superintendent of the organization that you were with came to visit, and all you had to cook on, I believe, was one of those hot blast stoves. They were about 18 inches tall and about this big around, about that tall, that heated the house as well as you used it for cooking.
Well,
You
I
were real
had,
bold to invite him to eat when you had nothing in the house to serve him.
well, I don't know if I was the first one, but my husband, he insisted that the general superintendent should stay for lunch. Well, I had to cook on this a tin heater, and I would take the lid off, which had a little handle, you see, to it, and I'd put a piece of tin across it, and then I could put about 3 pans on there and make the fire real hot, and I could cook most anything. And never had had that experience before, but you know, when you're a pioneer and you do a lot of things. And I wondered, when my husband invited him, I said, well, to myself, what have I got that I could fix and fix in a hurry on that stove? And so I don't think I had any money. But the minister said, I will not stay for lunch. They give me, unless you will accept my lunch money. He said, the council gives me 50 cents for lunch every day. See, way back there you could get a very nice meal in a restaurant for 50 cents. And he says, if you will accept my lunch money, I will stay. So he handed it to me, I believe, and I gave it to your daddy. And he went out the back door and went to the grocery store, and he bought lunch for us. And so then I fixed it, and he says, well, thank you for that most delicious meal. And my husband said, you thank yourself. You paid for it. Oh,
If he hadn't bought his, nobody would have anything to eat.
No, it fed everybody that day. I think that's marvelous. I think the exciting thing. Tell about the beginnings of the church actually in Richmond, or the way that.
Well, now we went away to Sperryville, and had a revival, and that's when God healed that Sister Woodward that was there, and she had been in bed for 3 years. And she had tuberculosis of the lung, tuberculosis of the spine, and of the kidneys, I believe. and she had 3 inches of her backbone eaten away. And so God showed us that he would heal her. When we told the church that we were going to pray for the sick, some of the people said, well, there's no need to advertise a healing meeting because one of our members has been not far from the church, has been in bed for 3 years, and she doesn't even sit up anymore. And unless you can get her healed, you're not going to have any successful revival. So we prayed very hard, and we took, I believe it was a song leader with us, and went there one day. And she had lost all hope and faith because she hadn't even put her foot on the floor for 3 years. And with this inch of the backbone eaten away, you see, she couldn't really do it. And she hadn't sat up for a couple of years. Even in the bed, she just lay flat on her back, because she said when she attempted to get up or sit up, she got much worse. So the devil really had her bound. So we believed that God was going to heal her. And we said to this young man that went with us, now you're believing with us, aren't you, that God's going to heal her? And oh, he said yes. Later he told us, he said he didn't have an ounce of faith. He was just agreeing with us to encourage us, but as far as he was concerned, he had visited her home many times during those 3 years, and he knew how helpless she was, and she'd been prayed for by many people, and no results. So he didn't have any idea that God would ever perform a miracle. But anyway, we asked her to sit up in the bed. She said she didn't want to because, you know, she'd had such distress at other times. We said, in the name of Jesus, sit up. Then she sat up, and we said, you don't have any distress in your head, you're not suffering. She said, no, all the pain is gone. So then we told her to get up. Well, she just had a gown on. No, she's probably so poor she didn't have a house coat. So my husband said, well, I'll go out in the hall while you get up. So with my help, she was quite large, and I was very thin at that time. But God gave me strength to help her, and I took a hold of her arm, and she had quite a large room. It was at least as far as from where we are to the the wall here. And she walked over there and back to the bed with my help and back to the wall again before it really hit her that God had healed her. She hadn't been able to put her foot on the floor, you see, or walk or anything. And she got very excited then, and she really shouted and believed God. And so after she got back on the bed, my husband came in. And so he told her, he said, I want you to go to church tonight. And she says, well, I don't have any clothes to wear out. She said, I gave them all away because I've only been in the bed. And so she sent out to the neighbors, and she borrowed clothes, and the only thing, she had to wear bedroom slippers to church. She couldn't find any shoes that fit her. And it was in February, and snow was on the ground. She didn't have a coat, and your daddy let her wear his coat to church, his overcoat. And so we didn't tell anybody she was coming but this young man that had gone with us. And so he was going to lead song service, so your daddy said, now, I'm going to would take me and you see, you were with us, to the church, and don't tell anybody we're bringing Sister Woodward. And so then he went back to get her because it was just a short ways from the church. And so she walks in the door, and your daddy stayed behind her so she could walk. And he told her, now you walk right up on the front and take the front seat. And people began to turn, and they got so excited. They said, Sister Woodward has died, and this is her ghost coming to tell us she's gone. And they got so nervous because they actually thought it was a ghost. And it was so tremendous. And you know, she lived within sight of the church there in Sperryville for 3 years. But right after God healed her, she had to move 5 miles away, and she had to walk to church. And she said, God, now why is it that I was just a couple of blocks from the church when I was so sick? Well, God did it because the church people came and helped to wash and dress her and do things for her, fix her meals. And now I have to walk so far. And the Lord said, I want you, I moved you, I want you to walk to church, that all this community is going to know that I have healed you.
And she lived about 20 years after that.
She lived
Probably
maybe
more.
more. She lived at least 25 years she
Yeah.
lived afterwards. But all the people said, when that preacher and his wife are gone, she's going to be just as bad again, because he's given her shock treatments and electrical treatments when we go to see her, you know, and pray with her to encourage her to believe God. Why, they thought we were doing something, you know. And one day we were there to see her, and 2 ladies came in, and one just sank right down in a chair. She says, well, I heard it, but I didn't believe it. She just couldn't imagine that that woman was perfectly healed. Well, there was a judge on one of the Richmond benches here and courts, and he lived in Sperryville. He brought the news back. See, we didn't know a soul. He brought the news back to Richmond about this marvelous healing in Sperryville, and told a lady that lived in the apartment building where he and his wife lived, because they had their real home up there, and they went on weekends to Sperryville, but then came here for his work through the week. And so then she called us at a neighbor's before we ever had a telephone, and said, you have got to come and pray for my mother. And I don't know if you remember her or not, but she is the one that gave me that radio I have in the living room at home.
What was her name?
Her name was Charlotte, I believe, Wimbish.
Wimbish, I remember that name.
And I expect she's dead now many years.
Now, who had
or
the
so.
first revival in the Richmond church?
The biggest revival.
Was that young girl?
She was 9 years old. And we had 300 seats then, and she filled every one of them.
Somebody Wells, wasn't it?
Yes.
Beatrice Wells.
Beatrice
Yes, I was
It's
forgetting.
amazing
But
how
what-
that name's coming.
Wasn't it actually all of the miracles of healing and the
That
different
brought people.
that brought people? But I'm saying also in your ministry, in Dad's ministry, it was attending the different prayer groups in town and praying for people
Praying
to be
for the
healed.
people. And practically everyone that came in the first months had been healed of something very desperate. You know, they weren't going to live unless God
Wasn't it
performed
so the
miracles.
end of one year you had 12 people and each one of them came from a different church and each one had a
Yes,
different miracle?
but I mean, we had more than that. But your daddy used to say we had 12, meaning that we had 12 people we could really count on.
Yes.
But our first revival was Easter Sunday, the 28th of March of 1937, and we had 45 chairs, and we had every one filled. You see, that first Easter Sunday. And so God, from a humble beginning,
I remember
he began
the
to
name W.L. Tyler, and Dr. Tyler was is a heart specialist in Richmond, probably still practicing today, and the husband was in the real estate business and on the deacon board of First Baptist Church. And Mother and Dad were asked to go pray for this Mrs. Tyler that had, if I can recall the details and you help me out, there was a growth the size of a loaf of bread
right through here.
here, and it was pressing against her heart. And she'd been to Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins, and they were afraid to operate, afraid that the pressure would kill her. And so she was laying just in the bed.
Not only that, but she had high blood pressure that reached 300, And if she ever stooped, blood would run out of her mouth. If she'd ever get out of the bed, she'd been in bed for 6 months at Johns Hopkins, and they had just brought her home, but that blood pressure was so high that...
You know, the mother and dad were attending these international prayer meetings, and they were asked to go pray for this woman, and when they went there, Dad and Mother prayed for her, and God instantly healed her. And she had been attending the Presbyterian seminary. And I believe Dad and Mother asked her, do you believe that Jesus is going to heal you? And the way that he read the scripture to her, or spoke to her, there was a faith that came, and she said she did
Well,
believe.
she saw Jesus. She saw him come and stand in the corner of the room. She saw him full height.
So after they
She
had
knew
prayed
then
for
she
her,
was gonna get
she
healed.
got out of bed and started walking, and they left. Dad's going to come by and pick her up
She
and bring
threw all
her,
her medicine away.
bring her to church that night. And then she called in the black butler that they had. His name was Louis. Louis, what are you having for dinner tonight? Well, we're having pork chops and mashed potatoes and gravy and some biscuits. She said, bring me some. Well, he went into the kitchen where her sons, and all of them very prominent, were sitting, and the doctor's son was there and said he was scared to death, you know. What's the matter, Louis? Well, Sister Tyler, Miss Tyler's asked for me to bring her a plate full of food for dinner. They dropped their head and says, well, take it to her. That's what happened to them just before they died. And the son went in there, and
That was for lunch,
and
because
when
she
he
went
saw
down
his-
for supper.
when he saw his mother, she was standing at the mirror fixing her hair. And said, what are you doing? He said, I'm getting ready to go to church. Go to church? You're dying. He said, I'm not dying. Jesus has healed me. And that testimony was in the Pentecostal Evangel and went all over America and
I still
many
have
parts
that
of the
copy.
world. And she became a great worker in that in the church in the early days.
Well, there's been many miracles, thousands of them. Our God is the same as when
So
he
then
was
you
here
were on
earth.
Grayland Avenue, and then from Grayland down on Curry Street. From Curry Street to the MacArthur Theater?
No, to
No.
Hull Street.
To Hull Street.
1105.
That's where the 5-year revival continued. Move of God for 5 years was going on.
Yes, but we
And
were
then we
actually
moved to MacArthur,
then to MacArthur.
to the big theater. And then we moved on Morris Street for 11 years.
Well, it must have been on MacArthur that you left to go overseas.
It was, but I think the interesting thing is actually that we were in such a humble place at Pine and Cary when just at the time that the move of God came. And I think that God actually prepared our family for that great move with certain events that were taking place just prior to this time, that when, you know, Brother Huckstra and Brother David Walker came to town, they needed somebody to actually sign as a guarantor for their bills. I think the local person to guarantee them for the
And
renting
your
of the
daddy was
mosque,
the one that signed.
and also for the newspaper and the hotels and for all of that. And nobody in town would, none of the preachers were willing actually to sort of
They
take
didn't
that
want to be
position.
identified.
They didn't want to be identified, and they didn't want to take this position financially. And although we had such a small church at that time, God honored, I think, you and Dad, because you were willing to take that responsibility and help a brother that you really didn't know, but you felt that sense that revival was on the way, that we have been so blessed because of it. I think
And see, we already were in Monroe Park.
But
for
in that
meetings at
meeting, they
night.
had little David had 5,000 and turned 5,000-6,000 away.
Yes, I wish Mother would talk a little bit about her own feelings on that revival.
He was just 14, and God really blessed him. It was tremendous. And that mosque at that time seated 5,000. It seats about 4,600 now, because they put wider seats in. But it was full clear to the top balcony.
How long did it continue?
It was about 6 weeks, I think. He came back. He left the mosque and went to Petersburg to the fairgrounds, and he put 18,000 there. And we went there one night and we couldn't get in. And then he came back twice that year. And that third time was when he had the people come to seek the baptism at 6 o'clock in the evening.
Oh, I remember backstage, the hundreds that were filled with the Spirit every night at
And
6.
people are still living that were filled with the Holy Spirit, still going on. And the marvelous healings that took place, they're still going on.
I remember hearing a story of the dad used to tell about those meetings when somebody came with no eyeball, and little David was praying, and he talked to Ray Huckster, who is now Chaplain Ray, on the radio. And he was his manager, and he said, look, Brother Ray, he said his eyes like a rabbit ball, little small rabbit eye. And God was creating that eyeball, and he prayed for him again and held the eye open while God created that entire eyeball in his head. And that's something.
Well, I think one of the things that excites me is not only what God did actually at that particular time in so many people being saved and filled with the Spirit. I know that the high schools and the junior high schools were just shaken by the Spirit of God, basically because he was so young. The young people were coming out to the meetings.
Well, one of the classes had 45 young people, each one saved and filled with the Holy Spirit in our church as a result of
yes,
that meeting.
I recall that when we actually moved later to Hall Street, that the whole platform was full of teenagers that were saved and filled with the Spirit actually in his meeting. But I think that not only what God did at that time, but I think it's the challenge that came to people. I think of people in our own ministry that were actually in those meetings, and so much of the greatness that we saw at that time was sort of planted in our spirit, and we remember as highlights in our life, not only looking back in the sense that God did it once, but also always conscious that he was going to do it again. And I think that God used little David probably to bless Richmond more than anybody that's ever come.
Anyone that's come, there was a great revival that broke out.
No one else has really ever touched it, has it?
Nobody has had a move of God that's shaken the city like that particular move of the Spirit. And I think that our family, the total change that came to our family came so much at that time. I know that I remember the afternoon services that actually took place. Was it the third time that he was in town?
Or
was that the second or
the
third
time?
But I remember the Akka temple that used to be on Gray Street down about, what would that be, about...
but 300 block probably.
About 300 block West Grace. Anyway, I remember that being filled with people. And of course, this was the first time that most people ever saw folks lay hands on people individually and minister prophetically. It was the beginning of that new move.
See, that was in 48 and 49. And 48, May the 14th, 1948, was when Israel became a nation. And God began to send a tremendous revival all over the world because of that. When the Jewish people got released to go to their homeland, then it was like God released his power and his Spirit for all the world. So it was very tremendous. And we moved into 1105 Hall Street Church in December of 49. And we had already been in the revival, you see, before then. But it was the 48th and year 48 and 49 that God sent prophecy back to the earth.
Well, I think one of the things that pleases me about that period is how that Dad mentioned so many times that it was the hands being laid on him that actually lifted not only him but our whole family and our whole church into a new realm in the Spirit. And he said that actually when he was called forward, I guess the two of you must have been called forward together to be prayed for, that this brother who didn't know anything about the two of you spoke concerning your problems of the past and how that you had had hardships for the sake of the gospel. but that from then on God was going to bring you into a new dimension, and that you would minister to the multitudes. And of course, when having a small church, one couldn't imagine how that you would ever preach to the multitudes, because at that time we didn't hear of anybody who had ever preached to the multitudes. I mean, at that point we didn't have Billy Graham on the scene. I guess people like Amy Semple McPherson had big crowds in America.
Well, she had just died.
And
before.
several of those that had big crowds in America, but not overseas. And it was sort of a connotation of what God was going to do among the nations. And I think that Daddy often said that it was the laying on of hands by those brethren, whose names we can't even remember, that totally lifted the two of you.
Well, it was nothing but a revival spirit. You
Yes.
see, it was a tremendous move of God in there.
Was one of those men Dr. Thomas White?
Yes.
No, well,
yes.
Brother Wyatt wasn't the one that laid hands. He
Yes, he was one.
He came actually and was praying in the evening services at the mosque. But
I
I
can't
think
think
there
of
were
the
two
other
other brothers
Was there a
actually
brother from
earlier.
Chicago?
I don't recall the names.
No, I think they were. Brother White was from Seattle. I think both of them were out
Had that
west.
Wings of Healing fabulous
Temple, yes.
radio ministry that God gave him.
Yes, but I think the fact is that from 48 on, what God did and what we witnessed as a family was the fulfillment of that beautiful word that was given at one moment in time. God dropping a faith in our hearts to believe for the nations and believe for great things. And I recall the first time that you and Dad and I actually stood on a platform in India. And I remember as the multitudes
I was back
were in front of us.
1961.
That, you know, how all of us were filled with such tears of rejoicing that God's word was actually beginning to be fulfilled
Yes.
in a very concrete way.
Is that the end of our time?
Did they get that summons in or not?
I think so.